But before we go into lunch, we still have this presentation that it is, I think, extremely important to have to contextualize the discussions that we're going to have during the day and tomorrow. And of course, the aspect of digital remittances revolution approaching 2030, which will be following this presentation. The presentation is about RemitSCOPE, Remittances to and from Africa, Market Landscape 2023 and beyond. It is about data. I may ask, please, if you can just interact and stop the interaction if it's possible. Thank you very much for your understanding. What we saw 20 years ago is that remittances were anecdotal. Be at government level or market level, everybody sort of have heard about this aspect of sending remittances home. Some were astonished about the numbers, but everyone thought that it was anecdotal. Things have changed since then. We learn a lot about the flows, the reality, what this means for so many member states receiving these flows. We learn a lot about cost. There's actually an SDG related to cost. And we hoped that this cost could come down from a 20% of cost of sending remittances, where we are today, depending on whatever continent that is dealing with this, we see something that goes beyond the two-digit number. However, what we realize is in our search for lowering costs, providing more impact of these flows, more is needed. And that more includes a lot of things, but one of these is data. We mentioned about the private sector, how important it is, how important their role is in maximizing remittances. Well, if you want private sector to enter, they do require better data. 20 years ago, the market would look very differently. We have maybe 2, 3 players in it. Today, we have a myriad of players in a specific marketplace or corridor, but more data is needed towards that. With data, we can do a lot more. Of course, in terms of addressing better regulatory framework, consumer behavior, market segmentation, business models, among others. And this is why a few years ago, IFAD and the European Union or Commission decided to build a tool that would address this lack of data that we call RemitSCOPE. It is a market intelligence data portal that it is supposed to take us to the next level of what the private sector or entities in the remittances ecosystem would like to see or enter into. We're facilitating also that analysis with a set of indexes to try to stimulate, should you go into that business or not? Is there an untapped market that you should know about? So we engage into that effort and analysis for the African continent. I'm happy to say that we're expanding this now to other areas of the region, but today it is about Africa, so this is what we're going to present to you. So I really don't want to be longer than this. We're going to give you just a little video to present what RemitSCOPE does, and then we're just going to use it and present you the African market, remittances market, with the information extracted from RemitSCOPE. So without further ado, I will invite our colleagues to put on the video, and then I will, right after this, let Sarah Hugo from DMA to do the presentation also on behalf of IFAD.
In today's global economy, the movement of money across borders plays a crucial role in supporting families, driving economic growth, and fostering financial stability. Introducing RemitSCOPE, your comprehensive data analysis platform for remittances. RemitSCOPE is a powerful tool designed to provide invaluable insights into the world of remittances, empowering you to make data-driven decisions with confidence. With RemitSCOPE, you gain access to real-time data and analytics, allowing you to monitor and analyze remittance flows globally. RemitSCOPE, your trusted partner in remittance data analysis. Unlock the power of data and transform the way you understand and leverage remittance flows.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here today, and thank you to IFAD for the invitation to speak. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you insights from RemitSCOPE to give an overview of the remittances market into and intra-Africa, and looking at some of the drivers and trends drawing on the latest data available. RemitSCOPE compiles over 140 indicators from a variety of different sources that are relevant and of interest when analysing a remittances market. This includes data on migration, remittance flows, pricing, financial inclusion, access, and the competitive environment. And this is arranged over 5 different thematic dashboards with 5 indexes and 54 country profiles. And it's perhaps in these 54 country profiles that the real value is, where all of the data on one country is consolidated and compiled into one country profile in a standardized format. As with anything remittance data related, we recognize and appreciate that there are challenges with the quality of data, with the consistency, and with the quantity of data. And this is something that I know that we will be discussing more in this forum. But I would also like to make an appeal for all of us to work together and to put in place the systems and the frameworks and the processes that are needed in order to close these gaps and in order to improve the quality of data. And as new data becomes available, so will RemitSCOPE also evolve in order to showcase this new data. As Pedro said, at the moment, RemitSCOPE is just focused on Africa, but over the coming months, it will also be RemitSCOPE Latin America and Central America, and also RemitSCOPE Asia. It is a tool that we very much look forward to you using. The site is now live. It went live last night. So there will still be, it's a beta phase, and it will continue to be improved over the coming weeks and months. Please also note before you all reach for your phone and for your tablets that it's not currently available on mobile, so only on desktop at the moment. Thank you. So my aim today is to give you a snapshot, just an overview of the data. And what I'm going to share with you today is you probably know it already, we've heard a lot of it already, and you know it instinctively from operating in the market. But what the RemitSCOPE tool gives you is that data to back it up and to analyze it according to your needs when you need it. So broadly, I'm going to cover some aspects from the different thematic dashboards, including around diaspora and migration, remittances, pricing, financial inclusion, digitization, payout options and access points, and the operating environment. But I promise I'm not going to spend too long. So here is an illustration of some of the data that you can hope to find on RemitSCOPE. Apologies if it is difficult to read, but we really wanted to give you an idea and a flavor for what is available on the site. According to UNDESA, that collects and publishes data on international migrant stock, there were 40.4 million Africans living outside their countries of origin in 2020, which is the latest data that we have. This represents about 3% of the total African population. These figures are likely, and also in many cases known, to be a significant underrepresentation of the true size of the African diaspora and those that may be sending remittances home, as it doesn't include the second and third generation diaspora or irregular migrants as well. The countries from the data with the largest diaspora are Egypt, with 3.6 million people, Morocco with 3.2 million, and South Sudan 2.6 million, and Somalia. The country hosting the largest number of Africans was France in 2020, with 4.3 million Africans living there. And the countries with the fastest growing number of immigrants are South Sudan, the Gambia, Eritrea, Nigeria, and Cameroon. So RemitSCOPE also allows us to look at the data not just at a country level, but to break it down into corridor level where it is available. And here we can see from the chart on the top left that the largest corridors are the Algerians moving to Morocco, Algerians and Moroccans moving to France, Burkinabe to Côte d'Ivoire, and South Sudanese to Uganda. Particularly interesting to note, I think, is that, and I think we heard it mentioned earlier today, is that most of the African diaspora are actually living in other African countries. There are, according to the UNDESA data, 20.7 million migrants from Africa in other African countries, 3.3 million in North America, 4.8 million in Asia, and 11 million in Europe. So over half of the migrants from Africa are living in other African countries, with Côte d'Ivoire being a main destination country, as well as a lot of inter-regional migration within West Africa and South Africa as well. So I think Nomad have just released some new data last night. It's not up yet, but it will be by tomorrow. So this is based on the previous data. But as we've heard already, an estimated $100 billion is estimated to have flowed in 2022 into Africa, which is a compound annual growth rate of 12% over the past 3 years. As Dilip, I think, said earlier, you can't keep them down. So in considering what has been happening in the global economy in these COVID and these post-COVID times, with high oil prices, the Russia-Ukraine war, and the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing, this once again shows the incredible resilience of remittances in the face of adversity. It is also interesting to note from the graph at the bottom left that Egypt, Nigeria, and Morocco account for nearly 65% of total remittance inflows into Africa. Taking a regional perspective, North Africa is the largest receiver of remittances onto the continent, receiving 48.7 billion, followed by West Africa, receiving 33.6 billion. So the top remittance receiving countries, according to the World Bank in 2022, Egypt, Nigeria, Morocco, and Ghana. The most dependent economies are the Gambia, Somalia, Comoros, and Lesotho. And there are 16 countries in Africa where remittances account for more than 5% of their GDP. The chart on the left shows an index that has been specifically developed for RemitSCOPE that takes into account a number of different weighted variables in order to illustrate the countries where remittances are the most important. Informal remittances are something that we quite often hear about and we've heard about earlier today, and they still play an important role in Africa, especially in some corridors. By their very nature, the amounts of remittances sent through informal channels is unknown, as they are by their very nature unrecorded. However, at RemitSCOPE, what we try to do is to gather all of the data and all of the information that is available and put it all in one place. So here we can see that there is data from, for example, estimates from the National Bank of Kenya, from the Central Bank of Ethiopia, and from Uganda that has been gathered through surveys. As data is updated and improved, so too will that be reflected in RemitSCOPE. RemitSCOPE also presents remittance inflow data and outflow data as well. We've got both send and receive split out on the portal. But RemitSCOPE also presents remittance inflow data at a corridor level, including both the estimates that are published by the World Bank in their bilateral remittance matrix, and also compiling and publishing data by the few central banks that also share it. It's interesting to note from the bilateral remittance matrix that it is estimated that inflows from other African countries is estimated around 20 billion USD, so roughly 20% of total remittance inflows, despite half of African migrants living in other African countries. We know that there are big challenges with intra-African data, and also to some extent with intra-African remittances, as we've heard earlier, the costs involved and the high use of informal. As I mentioned, RemitSCOPE is also compiling remittance data published by central bank at a corridor level. A few central banks in Africa are really taking the lead, such as Kenya, Morocco, Senegal, South Africa, and Ethiopia, and are publishing remittance data broken down by corridor. We know that other central banks are also looking to improve their collection methods and systems to also produce and share this data. RemitSCOPE is compiling and will continue to publish central bank remittance data broken down by corridor, as we really hear that this is responding to the needs of policymakers and industry. In terms of pricing, historically remittances into Africa have been expensive, and it continues to be the most expensive region to send money to globally at an average of 8.9% of the send amount. Remittance prices is mainly collected through the World Bank's Remittance Prices Worldwide website, and also through GSMA, and some through Prime Africa pricing. It's worth mentioning that when we talk about the average cost of sending money, we are including the fee paid by the sender, and then also the margin on the foreign exchange that's made by the service provider, which is often hidden to the user. Generally, the trend in pricing into Africa shows a slow downward trend, but at the current trajectory, we are going to miss the SDG 10.C of 3% at this rate of decline. As you would expect, although these lines look relatively smooth, especially at a kind of average continental level, there are some countries where pricing really is quite volatile, and even in some countries where pricing has been going up over the last year. RemitSCOPE will track the trends every quarter, and as we mentioned, at a country level, you can have a look at these trends at a country level. Here we have on the top left the high-cost corridors. So there really are still some high-cost corridors, as seen in this first chart, even when we remove the banks from the sample. Some of the intra-African corridors are still expensive, for example, Tanzania to Uganda and Rwanda, and sending money to the Gambia. It's interesting to observe that when we break down the pricing by channel, as we do in this bottom graph, for example, whether money is being sent cash to cash, or whether it's through digital channels or whether through mobile, this is where we begin to see much lower prices. So having seen in the last slides the cost benefit of digitization, here we look at financial inclusion, or the ownership of a financial or mobile account, as an indicator of how many of the adult population can use and take advantage of the benefits of digital remittances services and the benefits that they afford, not just in price, but also in terms of access, convenience, security, and access to other financial services. Financial inclusion, according to the Findex survey, or mainly the Findex survey, has been growing across the continent. The average is now 51% of the African population in 2021, up from 20% in 2015. So whilst this is significant improvement, there is still significant progress to be made, and I think that digital divide that we were hearing about earlier. A real driver of financial inclusion has been through the uptake of mobile money. Kenya, Ghana, Gabon, and Uganda are reported to have the highest levels of mobile money account ownership as a percentage of the population. In terms of payout options and access points, RemitSCOPE also tracks and shares information on the different market players, as well as the payout and send options and access points. And the good news is that there are many options for paying and sending remittances, whether it's through banks, the post office, mobile money providers, microfinance institutions, foreign exchange bureaus. They all have a role to play in this value chain. And it is now much easier for international money transfer operators and fintech to create a network in Africa because of the role that aggregators are playing. They've harnessed the growth in mobile money and other agents, and there are now more options for customers, more locations to send money to, and it's much easier for the international money transfer operators to establish a network for paying out very easily. Finally, RemitSCOPE has also used dedicated RemitSCOPE researchers from the different regions in Africa to collect information on the licensing environment and regulatory environment, and also on other market indicators that might be useful when assessing remittance markets. For example, some of these that you can see here have been compiled into an index that brings together 8 different indicators. For example, looking at restrictions on outbound remittances, whether there are exclusive relationships between RSPs and agents, whether the country's on the FATF black or grey watch list that may affect de-risking, whether there's a parallel market or black market for local currency that affects the demand for formal remittance services. So that brings me to the end of my presentation and the snapshot overview of remittances and remittance-related data in Africa. We do have a stand at stand number 16, I think, so please come and see us. RemitSCOPE is a work in progress and will continue to evolve as the community demands new insights and as new data becomes available. As you can see, there's a lot of data in here, but there is still a long way to go, and it really requires collaboration. So please use the tool, check the data for your country, provide us with updates where you have them, tell us what you want to see on the tool, and make sure that RemitSCOPE is part of your regular activities. Thank you very much.